So Dr. Sabino, thank you for moderating this panel.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to see you all. We have two speakers in this next session. Bert Hitchcock is Hargis Professor of American Literature at Auburn University, where he has served as English Department Head. He holds an advanced degrees from the University of Oregon and Duke University, and studied also at the University of Melbourne, Australia. He is the author of a book on 19th century Richard Malcolm Johnston, and has been the co-editor for 4 editions of the textbook anthology American Short Stories, being published in its 8th edition by Longman in 2007. He is also a winner of the Garcia Current Award. Our second presenter is Don Noble, who has been host of the Emmy-nominated Alabama Public Television literary interview show Bookmark since 1988. For that show, he has conducted more than 200 interviews. Since 2002, he has reviewed fiction and nonfiction, mainly Southern, for his weekly segment Alabama Bound on Alabama Public Television. His 2 most recent edited books are Climbing Mount Cheehaw, Emerging Alabama Writers in 2004, and Zelda and Scott, Scott and Zelda, Essays on the Fitzgerald's Life, Work, and Times, 2005. He is also the editor of Hemingway, A Revolution, The Steinbeck Question, New Essays and Criticisms, The Rising South with Job L. Thomas, and A Century Hence by George Tucker. His reviews, essays, and interviews have appeared in numerous periodicals over the past 35 years. He serves on the board of directors of the Alabama Humanities Foundations. He holds the Ph.D. from UNC Chapel Hill and is Professor Emeritus of English and Adjunct Professor of Journalism at the University of Alabama. He is the recipient of the Eugene Current Garcia Award for Alabama's Distinguished Literary Scholar for 2000, and with Brent Davis received a regional Emmy in 1996 for excellence in screenwritings for the documentary I'm in the Truth Business, William Bradford Huey. And we'll welcome our first speaker.
To complement or to counter moonlight, magnolias, and mockingbirds, those stereotypical romantic emblems of the American South, I wish to propose another iconic trio, also, if variously alliterative, and much more widely appropriate, are blinding, blistering summer sun, crows, and Chinaberry trees. Once so common a sight as to be practically emblematic of the region, Chinaberry trees appear often in imaginative Southern literature of the 20th century. No writer has done more than Albert Murray to manifest this tree's historical import and symbolic value. Its embodiment and ultimately unification of the lives of diverse races and social classes, and its function as a privileged agent of inspiration. In observing simply on the one hand that there was a Chinaberry tree in the front yard, and asserting on the other that the Chinaberry tree was ever as tall as any fairy tale beanstalk, Murray traverses a vital gamut of human experience, and especially African American experience in his native South. What is this thing called Chinaberry tree? Most students at my Southern Land-Grant University today do not know. Scientifically, its name is Melia azedarac. In English, besides Chinaberry tree, it's also called the Persian lilac, paradise tree, white cedar, umbrella tree, bead tree, syringa, hook tree, China tree, and the pride of India tree. Other objective data can be gleaned from common botanical reference sources. A member of the mahogany family, the Chinaberry is a deciduous, medium-sized shade tree, growing especially rapidly in the first several years after initial germination. In 4 or 5 years, it is likely to be 20 feet tall with an equal spread, and in maturity, it will reach 30 to 50 feet high. It has dense, fern-like, dark green, 3-compound pinnate leaves, 2 to 3 feet long, with numerous 1 to 3 inch leaflets in the spring. In the spring, fragrant lavender lilac flowers appear in panicle clusters at the ends of its branches. In the summer come the berries, smooth, eventually golden yellow, a half to 3/4 inch in diameter. Inside each berry is a large bony seed pit. In the autumn, the leaves turn a bright yellow and fall early. The berries, which are very green and very hard at first, which ultimately become wrinkled and sticky as they ripen, remain in clusters on the bare tree into the winter. Chinaberry trees grow in a wide variety of situations in which other trees fail, including hot, full sun, dry soil, and alkaline soil. In addition to scientific descriptions, social and cultural facts about the Chinaberry tree are also readily referenced. The heartwood of the tree, though brittle, can be used for cabinet making, and because of its resistance to termites, is employed in some larger building purposes as well. Its leaves have been utilized as an insecticide and as fish poison. The Chinaberries themselves are said to be poisonous to humans and other animals, pigs, for example. Birds, however, can and do eat the berries, though not without effect. The fermented Chinaberries, it has been observed, are especially attractive to blue jays in the springtime, and it gives them a wild, tipsy feeling. Also reported for humans is that during the American Civil War, the Chinaberries were used as a source of alcohol. Historically, the greatest human use of the Chinaberry is indicated by the widely used label of bead tree. The stones or pits of the berries are large fluted drapes that are easily pierced and dyed in order to make beads for necklaces and rosaries. In Persia, India, Ceylon, and Malaysia, where the Chinaberry is considered to be holy, the berries were strung into garlands and draped over altars. In the U.S. South, Chinaberry necklaces and bracelets, have a necklace on, were commonly worn mostly by young females as well as older females, while for youthful southern males, the hard green Chinaberry provided fine ammunition for homemade slingshots, pea shooters, and pop guns. Evaluative judgment or personal opinion about the Chinaberry tree are also to be found in contemporary reference sources. One illustrated encyclopedia opens its entry on Melia azedarac by calling it a scourge over much of the South. And under general information, in a kind of question and answer format put out by the University of Florida Cooperative Extension Service, there appears this memorable entry for the Chinaberry. Outstanding tree? No. The hard historical fact is that the Chinaberry tree has not fared too well in the United States. Horticulturally, its reputation has suffered a near fatal decline. Originally a native of tropical Asia, the tree has been cultivated in England since the 16th century and was introduced in a big way to southern colonial America in the 18th century. A French immigrant botanist and nurseryman, André Michaud, receives the most credit for this introduction. It was, says one horticulture historian, Michaud's most noteworthy such achievement, despite the fact that Michaud also was responsible for bringing the azalea and the crepe myrtle to America. Pride of China trees were planted at Mount Vernon by George Washington and at Monticello by Thomas Jefferson. In many southern communities, Charleston and Savannah, for example, it was planted in large numbers along city streets, a beautiful, shady, and ornamental public avenue tree of discriminating choice. Passionately opposed to the slavery that brought the plantation and flourishing port cities of the South into being, Harriet Beecher Stowe was positively passionate about the China tree. In Chapter 32 of Uncle Tom's Cabin, she makes it the supreme example of natural and moral beauty among terrible ugliness, a natural representative of the vitalizing world of spirit as opposed to the consumptive world of human materialism. When Uncle Tom arrives at Simon Legree's plantation, I'm quoting, the wagon rolled up a weedy graveled walk under a noble avenue of china trees, whose graceful forms and ever-springing foliage seemed to be the only things that neglect could not daunt or alter. Like noble spirits, so deeply rooted in goodness as to flourish and grow amidst discouragement and decay. Later, as Legree rides toward the slave quarters on a superb moonlight night, The shadows of the graceful china trees lay minutely penciled on the turf below, and there was that transparent stillness in the air which it seemed almost unholy to disturb. Ironically, the Chinaberry tree's fall from horticultural grace began just about the time Stowe's best-selling novel appeared. Writing to the editor of the Natchez Daily Courier in October of 1854, Thomas Affleck was among the first horticulturists to bash the ever-so-common Chinaberry tree with the written word, and he wrote, "The perpetuating pride of China tree, beautiful though it be, to the exclusion of scores of magnificent trees native and introduced, is, to say the least of it, in very bad taste. It is a filthy yard tree, too, when compared with many others." Today, it is hard to find any favorable professional word for the China tree. In the United States, the Chinaberry has fallen into disrepute, it is said, because its seedlings tend to spring up like weeds. Indeed, it is now labeled a weed tree and negatively categorized as invasive. The berry itself, eventually very messy, is regarded as a special problem. Today, according to the Florida Cooperative Extension Service, and I'm quoting, "You will not find anyone recommending planting this tree." In 20th century American literature, it was a different story. If only by virtue of specific mention of the Chinaberry, modern writers of and about the South followed the example of the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. For some of them, the Chinaberry tree is simply a firmly planted fixture in their realistic presentation of the region. For others, it becomes more than just accurate backdrop or scenery prop. It grows to become an objective correlative, to blossom into a significant symbol. In its literary fiction as an actual southern landscape in the early 20th century, one is most likely to encounter a Chinaberry tree around the humble houses of backcountry black families. Economically not well-to-do, members of these families often, however, do well in other respects. Here, for example, is how William Faulkner describes the home of Admirable Parsham Hood, called Uncle Possum, in the Reivers. It was a dog-trot house, paintless but quite sound and neat among locust and Chinaberry trees, in a swept yard inside a fence. And an old man on top of the gallery steps, very dark, in a white suit and galluses and a planter's hat, with perfectly white mustaches and an imperial. A Chinaberry tree also graces the yard of the home of Joe and Missy May in Zora Neale Hurston's The Gilded Six Bits, a short story that begins, "It was a Negro yard around a Negro house and a Negro settlement that looked to the payroll of the G&G Fertilizer Works for its support. But there was something very happy about this place." Eudora Welty's Livy concerns another poor rural black couple. In the title character, the unhappy young wife of an old and ailing husband is nostalgically transportedly reminded of Chinaberry flowers by the fragrance of some lipstick that a traveling cosmetic saleswoman is trying to sell her. Her hand took the lipstick, and in an instant she was carried away in the air through the spring, and looking down with a half-drowsy smile from a purple cloud, she saw from above a Chinaberry tree, dark and smooth and neatly leaved, neat as a guinea in the dooryard, and there was the happy childhood home that she had left. Typically, then, the Chinaberry tree appears in the domestic domain of rural and small-town Southern African Americans. In fact, the Chinaberry is often seen as the denominator of, or the demarcator for such locations or communities. In Madison Jones's A Cry of Absence, for example, oaks and pecans and boxwoods are associated with the old plantation big house, while, and I'm quoting now, in back, there were 4 log cabins across the field and a stand of Chinaberry trees. And it remained the same in the 1950s town setting of Jones's novel, at the north edge where the interstate would come through. The rundown houses with their Chinaberry trees and the little green oasis that was a spring where the neighborhood neighbors still got their drinking water. Occasionally, the tree occupies an intimate place in the lives of whites, but whites whose hardship and social status placed them in the spiritual company of Southern blacks. From West Alabama actuality via Truman Capote's childhood memories, and loaded with magical evocative possibility, an easily climbable double-trunk china tree supports the centrally important treehouse of Colin Fenwick and Dolly Talbot in The Grass Harp. As no one else did, says Capote, these two alienated outsider characters were aware that this china tree treehouse was really a ship, that to sit up there was to sail along the cloudy coastline of every dream. A merging of black and white racial worlds, with the Chinaberry tree playing a central assimilative and humanizing role, is manifest in Jessie Fawcett's 1931 novel, The Chinaberry Tree. In her foreword, Fawcett says, in fact, that this work, which is subtitled A Novel of American Life, this novel, she says, is the story of Aunt Sal, Laurentine, Melissa, and the Chinaberry Tree. D.K. Campbell's synopsis of this work is as follows. The Chinaberry Tree contains 3 stories of 3 successive generations of women who must each find a way to deal with the issues of race, gender, and class that have made them what they are. The first story, of the biracial love between Sarah Strange and Colonel Holloway, is told in retrospect only. The second, of the effects of that love on their illegitimate daughter Laurentine, is the core of the novel. The third story follows Melissa, who very nearly meets disaster because she does not know the truth of her own illegitimacy. The title tree, Campbell goes on, is the physical and emotional center of the house and grounds given to Sarah by Holloway. This southern tree, she says, is out of place here in Red Brook, New Jersey, but it is the symbol and container of Sarah's one true love and becomes a haven for Laurentine and later for Melissa. The first paragraph of Fawcett's novel then describes another African-American woman's home, this time not in the rural South, but directly reflecting a Southern white lover's deep and genuine personal devotion. Around the trim dwelling lay miniature grounds extending for perhaps 1/10 of an acre, beautifully laid out and beautifully kept. It was a lovely place, sweet with velvet grass and 3 or 4 varieties of trees. In the spring there were crocuses, and later on lilacs and peonies. In summer the place was lush with roses. Gladiolas flamed in the fall and primmed hard self-reliant asters. There was a grape arbor and a vine with giant roots. But what these 3 women loved the most in that most lovely of places was the Chinaberry tree. And here is the ending of Fawcett's novel. But Laurentine and Melissa, so widely different, were sensing with all their being everywhere about them the immanence of God. The Chinaberry tree became a temple. With this sort of lyrical presence flowering in the fiction, it's not surprising to find the Chinaberry tree is also literally the subject of poetry. Andrew Hudgens in The Chinaberry Tree writes from the perspective of a white boy who goes to the colored part of town and have an experience that he is still striving to understand. Under the flowering Chinaberry we parked and drifted on the tide of hot scent, ebbing toward a dream we shied from. Mystified, we gave ourselves to fragrance, eyes shut to barrel fires and wicks flickering in smoky shacks. What was there to fix our eyes on? Purple flowers hidden in the leaves and the leaves in darkness. We didn't have to understand what we had witnessed. Fragrance numbed and suspended us among then the past and then the future, and then, which was the now, we levitated in. I've never been so far transported as I was there, under trees I wouldn't have on my green lawn. Azalea, redbud, cherry grace our lawns. To Turner Cassidy, also white, in his poem The Chinaberry Tree, it also clearly seems at least to be the tree of knowledge. Its shape uncertain in the bloom that scrims it, purple in itself a haze of gnats, the tree that will be knowledge, or what seems it, beckons in the rising heat and waits. Its shade will feather and be serpent. There, instinct to take the field and beat the beast or bound, already bargainers, a pair on whom the subtleties will all be lost. The Chinaberry tree holds such a place in James Applewhite's mind and remembrance that he produced Ode to the Chinaberry tree. His poem's last section reads, Chinaberry tree, our separate country, we tenanted your green imagining. From our flight of mind that seemed too high, we arced in descents you cushioned with your cotton swing. Your shadow and sun disguised the pure blue. In your skin of shade it was childhood and morning. While many writers then have traversed Chinaberry country, no one has tenanted its green imagining so consistent and fully as is Albert Murray. To him the flight of mind cannot aim too high. Ascent, not descent, is what he emphasizes. The childhood and morning of his tree get extended into the whole of life, where the pure blue sky becomes a destination and where, rather than a separate country, there's a blending of worlds. Only Zora Neale Hurston may rival him in associating the real-life Chinaberry tree of childhood with seeing and seeking the far horizon. Hurston, however, credits her mother with the admonition to jump at the sun, and the tree and the concept do not get so extended or so fully transformed in her writings as they do in his. In such essential ways does the Chinaberry tree reflect the African-American experience. Uprooted from its native place and brought from overseas to become first an object of value and then an outcast, that it is poetic, if no other kind of justice, that this tree came to be so directly and physically a part of that experience in the Deep South. A tree that grew rapidly and could grow most anywhere, it became a high centerpiece of rustic home and garden landscaping. Here it offered relief from a relentless sun. It was a natural family entertainment center, creating a shady place for storytelling and music making, and providing raw material for jewelry, as well as effective missiles for limited combat. Eminently climbable, it also offered a view of what lay beyond this home and its confined grounds. It was a reminder of the past and a fact of the present, but especially, as Jesse Fawcett writes, the Chinaberry tree and the future were inextricably blended. For Murray, a Chinaberry tree in the front yard of a three-room shingle-top house in Magazine Point, a.k.a. Gasoline Point, Alabama, became the spyglass tree. There would be other later physical heights he would give this designation to, but he is on his way out of actuality into metaphor from the beginning. It is wherever you go to look out, to learn, to expand your consciousness of the world. This is what a writer does, says Murray, to put together a story about how a person's consciousness develops. That's what it's all about, and those various contexts are extensions of the original context. As a writer, he continues, you try to find poetic images for the expansion of consciousness and the deepening and enrichment of insight. You have to have something concrete, because you deal with these big abstract questions in terms of idiomatic particulars, that is, concrete details that you actually experience. It is this particular tree that began it all and to which all subsequent experience in some way returns. Gasoline Point, Alabama, asserts Murray, would always be that original of all fixed geographical spots and temporal locations as well, from which, properly instructed as to its functional and thus tentative absoluteness, you measure distances, determine directions, and define destinations, all of which are never any less metaphorical than actual. The benchmark of the original perception and conception of horizons, and hence aspirations in terms of which everything else makes whatever sense it makes, are ineradicable. In the 7 League Boots, Murray writes, the original out-of-doors benchmark and Mercator projection map triangulation point of all of which was the Chinaberry spyglass tree in the front yard of that Sawmill Quarters shotgun house in Gasoline Point on the L&N Railroad outskirts of Mobile, Alabama. The various directions of north, east, and west were major U.S. cities, while due south, beyond Mobile Bay and the Gulf Coast, was the old Spanish Main of historical romances, followed by the Boy Blue adventure stories about daring do in the 7 seas. Scooter Schoolboy Murray would go to those cities and journey beyond to important, more abstract destinations. It is not too much to see the Chinaberry tree as the botanical equivalent of Albert Murray's blues idiom. In the very nature of its existence, its cyclical, seasonal life, and linear cultural history, the Chinaberry is a quintessential adequate image that provides the all-important and enduring representative anecdote. Both bloom and doom, bloom and glow are in its branches. There's ravishing fragrance and repulsive stink, captivating beauty and sickening rottenness. The hard and the squishy, the full and the bare, the poisonous and the playful, the glorious and the opprobrious, all are here. How can anyone consider Albert Murray's writings without slipping into rhythm and rhyme? For some reason, the old ladybug, ladybug, fly away home nursery rhyme resounds in my head. But to make it out for Murray, it needs to say, Chinaberry tree, fly me home, and fly me away from home. And also to improvise on a song that Murray himself made use of, and you can feel free to join in. Oh, Omni-Americans, oh, don't you cry for me, for I come from Alabama with a wondrous Chinaberry tree.